Welcome to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast, where insights, attitudes, and methods for success get illuminated. Learn what leaders and change workers have done and are doing now to create magnificent futures. We interview great guests who inspire you to overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Be sure you visit our website at self-helpcoaching.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, just relax as you listen. You can do something else, but be ready to make an important note. And let's get started.
The title of this podcast is Resilience, Being the Phoenix. Our guest is quite distinguished and in multiple fields. I've been looking to him for years, reading his articles and his books. In fact, I just ordered Executive Thinking recently. This is one of his latest books. He is my favorite blogger. Not one of them. He is my favorite blogger. That is totally true and sincere. In the 90s, he made neurolinguistic programming more accessible in a way and made a new branch of it. I have been fostering a reverent relationship with him. I look to him as a teacher, a friend, and an ally. I don't mind sharing this with the audience, and I hope Michael doesn't mind either. But one of the strategies I have for my company, Auxilium, is to be sponsored. Now, we're just a little startup deliberately avoiding venture capital. We think we're a baby whale, and we're looking for people who are established and well-respected to say some kind words about us. I've only asked about 4 or 5 people. He is one. And he said, quite intelligently, par for the course, very measured. He said, not now, maybe down the road, we'll take a look. Because, there's 2 kinds of people in the world, people who make claims and people who get results. And he's the latter kind. And he's looking, I imagine that's what he's looking from us to have. And when he does, then maybe he'll reconsider. But he is definitely a results person. He is an entrepreneur who lives in the Rocky Mountains of Western Colorado. By the way, it's one of my goals to have a home in the Rockies. So maybe in the future we'll be neighbors. For 20 years, he's conducted a private therapy practice, and for 10 years, an NLP training center. He shifted to modeling expertise in the early 90s. And from that, he created many NLP and neurosemantic models, including the meta-states model. He studied and worked with Richard Bandler, writing several books for him and about NLP, such as The Spirit of NLP, 96, Becoming More Ferocious as a Presenter, Time for a Change, etc. His doctorate is in cognitive behavioral psychology from Union Institute University in Cincinnati, Ohio. His dissertation explored the language of 4 psychotherapies: NLP, RET, reality therapy, and logotherapy, using the formulations of general semantics. In 1995, he addressed the Interdisciplinary International Conference presenting an integration of NLP and general semantics. His master's degree was in clinical counseling and psychology from Regis University in Denver, Colorado, and his bachelor's of science was in management of human resources. Prior to that, he took a master's in biblical literature and language. As a prolific writer, he has written 58 books. You did not mishear that. 58 books. Another 30 serial books, over 100 published articles, and is recognized as a leading NLP trainer and developer. Most notable of the models is the meta-states model, also the matrix model, axis of change, etc. He co-founded with Dr. Bob Bodenhamer Neurosemantics in 1996 as a field which focuses on meaning and performance. By the way, I feel like an idiot compared to him, but I say that with tongue in cheek. This is a guy who just walks the walk. It's just that simple. As a matter of expertise, he has completed 27 modeling projects, which include modeling resilience, self-reflexive consciousness, thinking, quote unquote, communication excellence, sales, persuasion, accelerated learning, wealth creation, women in leadership, fitness and health, cultures, leadership, collaboration, and more. Now, all that said, when I grow up, I hope to be like him. All that said, I give you Dr. Michael Hall, PhD. Welcome.
Thank you, Tony. I haven't heard that long list for a long time.
Sometimes it's good to rehear our resume because we forget what we've done and maybe be thinking about other things and not seeing the whole picture as much as we used to.
Yes, true enough. Yes.
Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It's an honor for me to have you here. I really do hold you in a great reverence. The body of work, which I just listed, speaks for itself, and and not just your experience and your contributions, but as a person, you're so prolific. That's exactly. One of my goals is to have this staff, and the purpose of the staff is to get the most out of Tony Petroza. It seems like you get the most out of Michael Hall. I don't know, probably with much less people than I imagine I need. It's fantastic. So you know and write on so many subjects, but like I said at the outset, the subject for this podcast is resilience. And I don't mind sharing with you, some years ago, my brother, who's a very accomplished entrepreneur, said to me, he gave me a very rare compliment. He said, one of the things that he admires about me is my resilience. I was like, wow, that's great. And that was great to hear from him. I respect him, and I'm an ex-paratrooper, and that's great. And I don't feel like I'm as resilient as I used to be. I don't know, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But I know that especially in these times, in a pandemic world that's still going on, it's probably more important than ever. Now,
right.
let me ask my first question. How did you discover the strategy of resilience?
Well, the short answer is I interviewed quite a number of people who had been through an emotional hell and had returned. And I was searching for what are the secrets of your being able to bounce back when you've been set back or knocked down in some way. And so the short answer is by interviewing people who had bounced back, become resilient, to find out their strategy.
But we often don't even know our strategies, right? You have to go much deeper than the conscious mind.
Right.
I mean, that's what modeling and finding out strategies is all about.
Right.
So it was quite a process, I imagine.
Right. I began in 1990 and finished it in 94. It was a 3.5-year project. And during that time, there was very little written on resilience. Today, there's many books on resilience, many websites, but at that time there was very, very little. And so I was looking for the NLP linear step-by-step strategy. How do you do it?
Now, as I said, I mean, in the age of COVID-19, people are like, oh, yeah, you wrote that because of COVID. No, resilience has always been an invaluable trait or quality or strategy to have. But exactly. Now is, we often think that things are topical because they're in our view, but that's just because they're in our view. All right. These things are always in play. We're only perceiving what we're perceiving. That doesn't mean that's it's new or that it's an elaboration.
Right.
So let's get back to when you first developed this in the 90s. What questions were you trying to answer?
Well, some states, learning state, joy state, relaxation state, anger state, fear state, some states are immediate. So one trigger and you go into state. But resilience is not like that. You can't think of something and then suddenly be resilient. Some states are complex and it takes a long time to develop. If we think about the health state, you can't just think health and then step in the state and you're healthy. Same thing with wealth. You can't think some people, some shysters will get you to think you're a millionaire and then feel like you're a millionaire and suddenly you're a millionaire. It just doesn't work that way. Well, resilience doesn't work that way either. So the question becomes, what are the steps? What do I need to think? What do I need to say to myself? What do I need to do? What are the steps that allows me to get up from a setback, get up on my feet, dust myself off, and develop inside a spirit in which I'm ready to go for it again?
What are the basic steps?
So one of the things I came up with at that time was the 7 stages of resilience. And the stages then show us the process a person's going to have to go through. Stage 1 is the setback. Something knocks you down financially, health-wise, relationship-wise. You're knocked down and you got to get up. The second stage is the emotional roller coaster stage, because now most of us, we're up or down, we think we can get out of it, we're depressed. And so the emotional roller coaster stage, when we're angry, when we're fearful, when a whole range of emotions start flooding our mind and body, eventually we get to the acceptance stage. Okay, it's happened, I've got to deal with it. It is what it is, acceptance. And from acceptance comes the coping stage. So the 4th stage is, what do I have to do to cope? Do I have to file bankruptcy? Do I have to file divorce? Do I have to apologize? What do I have to do to start getting my life back together again? After we cope, we eventually normalize. So we get back to where things are back to normal. And of course, that's what we're talking about during this pandemic. When do we get back to normal? And not some new normal, but how do we get back to life being normal? Finally, we can get to the mastering stage. And the mastering stage is when we're thriving. We're not just getting by, surviving, we're thriving. We have a vision, we have hope, we have dreams, there's energy and vitality inside. And the 7th stage would be the recovery. I'm back.
That's fantastic. Let's just take a quick moment to hear from our sponsor, and we're going to come right back with Dr. Michael Hall and talk more about these 7 steps of resilience.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Perficio. What if you could get the results of being coached without a human coach? What if a computer could coach you? Visit www.perficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can get coached without scrutiny, judgment, or pressure.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with Dr. Michael Hall, PhD. We're talking about resilience. Now, he just elaborated the 7 steps of resilience according to his strategy. And I think the second thing you cited was acceptance. Now, I happen to be a recovering addict, as they say. I was in AA and NA, which I think is very helpful, but ripe with pitfalls that you got to be careful about. I think one of the biggest things to be wary of is they teach the broken model. I don't think that we're broken, and if we were, we can be fixed. All right. If you were broken, you're fixed. If you were hurt, be healed. It's just that simple. Like you're nodding in agreement. But I found that 12 steps was a fantastic methodology for self-improvement for the screwed up individual. And if every one I thought was about acceptance. Every one, each step was about acceptance. And you talked about it being, I think, the second one, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a critical thing to accept things as they are, you as you are, what has happened, and not to fantasize if things were only different, if the situation was different, if I had different strengths or weaknesses, accepting things, that's critical. And if you don't do that, you probably went down a wrong road, and you're not going to become resilient until you come back to that point of accept or not accept. Yeah, exactly. So I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention to you, Doc. So, all right. So acceptance is critical. And then you also, another subsequent step was you talked about asking yourself critical questions that seemed to me were all action oriented. It's not enough just to discern which is which, but you've got to take steps from questions that were well asked. Ask yourself crappy questions, you get crappy answers. You ask yourself good questions, get good answers, and then acting on them. It seems to me that's what you were alluding to or describing. Is that accurate?
Right.
Okay, so it's acceptance and it is action oriented. To be resilient, those are two critical parts of it.
So let me introduce something that was occurring in 1990. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had developed the stages of grief, and 5 stages of grief, which is what a person goes through when they're set back. They go through denial, and then bargaining, and then anger and depression, and then finally acceptance. Her study was based upon Americans and how Americans deal with death and dying and the 2-year period. But her presupposition was you have to go through those stages. My question was, why? Why don't we start with acceptance? Because everything from denial to bargaining to anger to depression is refusal to accept whatever is. And you can't change anything if you don't accept it.
Right. So those were either preliminary or just completely unnecessary.
Most people still go through them. This is why people need to learn how to be resilient, because if they don't start with acceptance, then they're going to go through the emotional hell of denial, which is fantasy land, anger and fear, which is not going to help any coping, and depression. And so we start with acceptance that, okay, this is what I've got to deal with. Now, what do I do to begin to cope, begin to survive?
I found before I got to the place where I could accept, is that I was such a fantasizer. Fantasy. Oh, I just fantasized something else happening. She said this, she did that, I did this, I did that. And things would be so much better if things were as I fantasized. And that might have been my motive, but I found that it just caused me so much more perpetual pain that would not cease until I stopped fantasizing and remembered things accurately as they were, according to my own memory, which is highly fallible as it is, but that's not the point. The point is I wasn't wishing for something else. I was accepting things as they were, and that critical. And you cite that's the starting point. Well,
that's the starting point.
But there is the first point, which is there's the problem. Right, that's the start. Right. Okay. So you have the problem, which is the human situation. Right. If we have a problem, we know we're still a human, or at least a good chance of it.
So back in 1990, while there wasn't much written on resilience as such, Martin Seligman, who later became president of the American Psychological Association, he had written 2 books. One was Learned Helplessness, and one was Learned Optimism. Learned Helplessness and Learned Optimism, his words, is the critical turning point after acceptance. And without that, you can't be resilient. Learned Helplessness is a 3-fold understanding of whatever the problem is. And he summarized it in 3 Ps: personal, pervasive, permanent.
That's the helplessness?
Learned helplessness.
Yep.
That whatever happened, whether it was a financial crisis, a health crisis, a relationship crisis, whatever happened, personal, it's about me. If you do that, you're bringing the problem inside. Personal. Pervasive, it's everywhere. Now you have no room for any kind of joy or relaxation or happiness about any other part of life. It's everywhere. And then permanent, it's forever. So this is the structure of clinical depression. If you want to become clinically depressed, take some bad thing, It can be the smallest little thing. Somebody criticizes you, and now it's about me. Nobody likes me. Nobody ever will like me. I'll never have any friends, and this will be forever. And those 3 Ps is a way to piss all over yourself.
Yes.
Permanent, pervasive, permanent. So looking at that, I came up with 3 Ts. 3 Ts that keeps it out, that pushes out whatever the problem is, the bad thing is, it pushes it out. And the 3 Ts is that, there, then. It's that. It's not me. It's the way I talked. It's the behavior I did. It's the job I had. It's the misbehavior I did. It's the context in which that occurred. It's that. It's there. It's not everywhere. It's there, specifically at that time and that place and the location. And it's not forever. It's just then. So the cure for the 3 Ps of permanent, pervasive, and personal is that there, then, which then keeps the bad thing from coming inside and getting in our minds and hearts and contaminating us.
Right. So it's like the NLP meta model, but 3 specific questions: that, there, and then. That's where the goal is.
Right.
It's a funny thing. The 3 elements of the learned helplessness: personal, pervasive, and permanent. I imagine that you can excel in one area and need help in another. And one game changer, or at least it was very significant for me, is when I stopped personalizing stuff and started realizing, understanding, in my perception, that nothing is permanent, nothing at all. That people do to me, and that could be a lover or not just a casual lover, girlfriend, whatever. People do to me what they do, and it has little or nothing to do with me. I just happen to be there, not to mitigate myself, but people act out what's in them. It's not about me necessarily. They didn't want to rob Tony Petroza. I happened to be there when they were greedy, or when she was feeling unsure of herself and she wasn't getting her needs fulfilled by me, and she acted out, and I'm not making myself the good guy, because I'm both good and bad. But that was a critical plateau I needed to get to realize that things are not personal. They're not personal. And for me as well, the things that I do are not personal about myself. They're just what I've learned how to behave or how I perceive the world. And that was a critical. Now, the other areas about pervasiveness and permanent, those are 2 other areas that, you can excel in or need work in, but just that alone was a game changer for me. So,
right.
So,
how we think about that in NLP, we say that we are more than our behavior. Behavior is one thing, and ourselves as a human being, a person, we're more than our behavior. And sometimes our behavior isn't up to par. Sometimes our behavior causes problems, but I'm more than my behavior, and I can learn to do better behaviors.
It's a funny thing about that presupposition that you just cited. We are both NILPers. Obviously, you are much more distinguished and renowned than I am, to say the least. But I think that we both embrace the presuppositions. I think that's one of the things that attracts me to you. You're very congruent. You're a guy who really talks about NLP and really embraces it to whatever degree that you do. And I think NLP is fantastic, to say the least. But I have found, especially in this age of social media, that a lot of NILPers, that's their field, that they don't walk the walk or presuppositions as much as to make them congruent.
Right.
They attack people for their beliefs. Well, what happened to, allowing people their own model of the universe?
Exactly.
What happened to what you just mentioned? What happened to that? Now things are personal. Now a person's bad. Well, what happened to that? So it seems to me that when a person or a NILPer or embraces the precept. By the way, for those who don't know, in NLP we have presuppositions. We're basically not bylaws, but they are a set of quasi beliefs or something that we can really buy into in order to empower ourselves and to empower our clients.
Right.
And the first part, empowering ourselves, is a critical part. I love to empower myself. I don't like, and by buying into this stuff, nothing's personal, that I'm not smarter than you, that this is what you believe, and this is what I believe, and this is what you perceive, then there's no condemnation required. There's not even any criticism required.
Right.
It's a game. It's wow, things are okay as they are, and it makes it a lot easier to become resilient. I think when the world is not as nasty as I thought it was, that we're all just trying to get along as best we can, it makes it much more easier to be resilient.
Yeah. So once again, the whole idea of acceptance of other people, different ideas, acceptance, you can't change what you don't accept. And when we're just fighting, we're not going to be making any changes.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, so we'll take a quick moment to hear from our sponsor, and we'll be right back with Michael Hall.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Proficio. What are the secrets to wealth? Benjamin Franklin taught them, but people are ignorant or just forget. What if you make sure neither afflicts you? Visit www.proficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can actually become certain you are on your way to wealth.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast, and I'm here with Dr. Michael Hall, PhD. 20 years ago, I had a whirlwind romance. It was like the shortest, in terms of significant relationships, it was the shortest ever, but I think it was the most definitive ever in my life. And it took me a long time to, quote unquote, get over it. Now, I don't, I'm sure people define that differently, as people define almost everything differently. But I thought about this girl a lot for 5 years, which was surprising. Usually it was like, what was her name? But see, this girl got to me. I let her in, and damage was done. And so, how valuable could resilience, not just a general term, but by the way, you'll learn, audience, that Michael has written a book about resilience, and he's referring to it. He's one of the 58 books is about resilience. But how valuable is the learning of resilience in something about something as precise as getting over a relationship or a romance, as it were?
Well, so once we set it aside, it's there, it's then we can do some problem solving. What is it? And what are the conditions of it? And what do I need to do to handle it? With a relationship, is it over or not? If it's over, then acceptance that it's over, and now making apologies, making friendship, whatever is going to be, and then moving on. So if we can't confront whatever is that reality, so how many people make things worse because they won't fully accept it, and they won't file the bankruptcy papers, they won't file the divorce papers, they won't take the action. Maybe it's a health crisis. They need to go to the gym. They need to start working out, but they don't. So we can't cope unless we know what we're coping with and what are the best strategies for coping with that particular thing. And so once we have pushed it out, now becomes problem-solving time, and really doing some critical thinking about what it is and how to focus with it.
So there are different ways to cope. Right? I mean, how, like, basic, like, can you give an example of a different method of coping?
Well, it all depends upon what it is. A few years ago, I had a lesion that turned out to be cancerous. And as soon as I found out that it was cancerous, I started reading books on cancer research, healing cancer by natural means, vitamins and minerals, the doctors and what there's. So if I'm going to cope with something, I have to understand what that something is. So I have to educate myself. I have to learn. So almost everything is like that. If I'm going to deal with a business failure, I need to be learning about business and how business works and how contracts work and just how negotiation works and persuasion works. So learning is how we learn to cope more effectively with anything. And then we start making lifestyle changes. So I immediately eliminated all dairy products, all red meats, all breads. I just started eliminating the things that contribute to cancer.
So education is, if not the key, is definitely the critical thing to get into. Self-education.
Yeah.
Learn
Because if
about
you
things.
don't know how, then you don't know how.
Right.
And everything you're going to do is going to be foolish.
And then it's the fear of the unknown, right? Which could be anything
Right.
and everything. That's when, I'm a sailor. I love to sail. But sometimes I think about, I'm safe on the boat because I don't know what's in that water. It could be something so scary. Now, it may be devoid of life, but in my mind, it could be anything. But I also became a scuba diver. So I got into the water and got to see what was down there. And then I knew. And then I knew. So, and that was a game changer as well, because it was nothing scary necessarily. It was this and that, and that was okay.
So what you're talking about is turning on the light of knowledge, so that we know what we're dealing with. Not knowing what you're dealing with is what creates all those irrational fears.
And irrationality, I think, of course, we're all emotional creatures. That's the human description.
Yeah.
I think that we're all irrational to a degree, but I think that the trick really is to consciously and deliberately become less irrational. Really, to improve our emotional intelligence. If we do that, that's the ticket to a happier life, because we don't get bogged down by the unknown and make these assumptions that are detrimental and costly to us. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I love education. To me, all education, whether is self-education. I don't care if you got all the degrees like you've got and more. You need to learn what that's relative to you. What do you think?
So to tie up a theme of what you and I are talking about, it starts with a special kind of thinking that they're then. That kind of thinking helps to distinguish myself and behaviors, myself and context, myself and the world I live in. Then another kind of thinking, what is it? How to turn the light on? How to cope with it? So the kind of thinking, this critical thinking, instead of cognitive distortions, as we've been talking about, irrational fears, over-exaggerating, tunnel vision, awfulizing, it's the kind of thinking that leads us to the kind of learning that allows us to now master the challenges of everyday life. And that's what resilience is. It's mastering the challenges of life and keeping your vitality, your vision, your hope, your dreams, your love.
So, I was about to ask the question, why study resilience, but I think you just described it. That's why. All right.
Yeah.
Because that's the gravy of life, right? And you want the gravy, or you want to have a dry piece of meat.
Right.
How do you like that metaphor, Doc?
Yes, exactly.
So resilience is an invaluable thing to have. Would you say it's something you possess, or is it something that's more effervescent?
Well, it's something we develop. An interesting thing about resilience is our bodies are highly resilient. Mm. You get a cut, and a few days later, it starts healing up, and the body heals itself. Now, the mind has to learn how to do that. The mind and the heart, we have to learn how to keep things out that they're then, and we have to learn how to do critical thinking so that we cope effectively with whatever the challenge is.
You mentioned earlier learned optimism. I used to be a very negative person, and I still think I'm a negative person, but I constantly weed. I learned to constantly weed the negative thoughts from my mind, which are constant. If in a vacuum, I'll go to the negative. And I hope I didn't at the risk of giving the instructions to myself. I'm just describing myself. But I've also learned to be a weeder of my garden, right? The garden of my mind. And this was a critical thing. Now, one of my strategies why I had that, my motive for that strategy is that when I was disappointed, I wasn't surprised, but I found that I manifested those disappointments, right? Much more than I might have. I might have had much less of them if I was a little bit more optimistic. And that's how I developed. I became less pessimistic. I became more optimistic. Now, I think if you ask people about me, they would say that I'm quite an optimist. And I found that was a game changer, really, to be an optimist. No matter what my nature was, even if it's my nature to be suspicious or negative or whatever, to get past that. Okay, well, to go, well, that kind of thinking precludes so many scenarios that I would like, right? So many outcomes that would be so much more preferred than that disappointment. I can deal with the surprise. I found that I could deal with, this is a critical thing. I found that I could deal with the surprise by being more resilient, deliberately. I might have had a natural the resilience, but as I got older, I found that it was more fragile. Right. And by being deliberately resilient, I've had that process required me to become more optimistic.
Right. Now, my guess is a lot of the listeners is going to identify with what you just described. And part of the reason is what we now know in the neurosciences about brain development. When we do statistics on people, 60 to 70% of people say that they are pessimistic. Our brains are wired to be pessimistic when we're young. Why? Well, to survive, to watch out for dangers. Our brain is a anticipation machine of what could go wrong. And it does that until we have enough maturity, enough coping skill, enough intelligence to have all these coping skills to where, well, that's not a problem anymore. I can cross the street. I can look both ways, I can drive, I can do this. The more skills you have, the less fear.
Absolutely. When I was creating the virtual coaching program, Proficio, I saw that people have an away strategy or a toward strategy or both, right? And I felt that people needed both, generally speaking, because I was making a universal process that certainly is customized for the individual, because that's necessary. People are individuals, but there are times we need to get away from something. There are times we need to go towards something. Exactly. Right. And either it's contextual or there's a circumstance that can be created and a person brought into. By the way, let me run something by you. You're such a great person to do this because you're so experienced. I have there's an aside that I'm working on. I'm focused on Auxilium and Proficio because that's the way to be successful. But it's something I'm working on. I'm an entertainer as well. It's a show that's backburnered now where I'm a coach like you. Generally speaking, the general idea is that you can't help anyone that doesn't want to be helped. But I have this. It's more than theory. It's a model I'm developing that in a certain circumstance, there's an exception to that. If the circumstance is right, a person who does not want to be helped can be helped when they reach certain points where they surrender to the possibilities that they should accept help. What do you think about something like that, Doc?
Well, that's the threshold theory of personality that,
yes,
and it's what AA is built on also, that you have to get to the place where you give up absolute control and yield control to an intelligence higher than yourself. So that's a threshold thing. A lot of people go through a radical change when they reach threshold, and they reach that point, never again. And then something pops. And so creating some of those thresholds for people is what there's all kinds of interventions that really attempt to facilitate that.
Well, that's what I'm going to do. We'll see how I do. It's going to be, it's not going to be a small thing. I think it's going to be an attention getter. Anyway, okay, moving on. How did you discover the meta states? Meta states is a big part of what you developed. I've read your books on them, or some of your books on them. It's really fascinating stuff. How did you discover the meta states?
So one day I was asking a gentleman who had been to hell and back, which was the description of your resilience. So he said he's back in life. And so I started going through the stages. Okay, you had the setback. What was it about? He told me. You went through the emotional roller coaster stage. Okay, tell me about that. The ups and downs of your emotion. You went through the acceptance stage. Tell me about that. At some point, I asked him, how did you know to go from this stage to that stage? And that's when he said something to the effect of, it was like I had a state about all those states. And I knew I was going to get through. And so that's how I went from this stage to that stage. It was time to move on. And whether he said it or I said it, I don't even remember anymore. He said it was like a meta state to the state. And then that started bringing up all the things I had been reading in Gregory Bateson and Alfred Korzybski about levels of the mind and the self-reflexivity of the mind. And so here is a state that's not a state directly, but indirectly. So it's a state about a state, which then led to the metastates model.
You know, I would have thoughts about meta states. I'm like, okay, this is not the thing I am. I'm thinking about something else about it, you know. And but you've articulated it, you've codified it, or articulated it and developed it so a person can really get meta.
Yeah.
That's, man, what a great body of work you've done. But and this is not a criticism, sir. When I read your stuff, you're breaking this stuff down intellectually. The stuff that I have had ideas about, or inklings about, and sometimes it can be hard to intellectualize it, scholastically, academically, where it's more of it's a feeling or a nuance or an intuition, but getting it into words or processing it in words is another level. But you do it, and I appreciate it very much. Okay,
so to bring it to resilience, let's go to the very first stage of the setback. If you ask a person, what do you think about this setback? They're going to tell you their metastate. Right. Well, it's about me. It's forever. It's everywhere. I can't do anything. So that's what you think about the setback. I have just now heard their frame. And the problem that they have is their frame. They're not the problem. The frame is the problem. So, and it's easy to challenge it. So you think that everything you do is a reflection on you. And so your 7-year-old self, everything that 7-year-old did was a reflection on you. You're that 7-year-old self. Well, people go, well, not exactly. I'm grown up now. So every behavior you do is reflect. Or is there a difference? You behave. You're a person and you behave. And you're more than that. So it's not personal. So can we get that metastate going? It's not about me. It's about that behavior. And so now we're creating metastates all along the line at each stage of the resilience, so the person can keep moving out and becoming resilient.
Right. So it just gives them maneuverability, I think. Right.
Yeah.
They're able to maneuver. Now it's not stuck in this. It's how it is. No, there's a frame here.
Yeah.
Whether they weren't even realizing it, but there is a frame.
Exactly.
Now you give them a frame and they can adjust that.
Yeah.
That's great. Let's take a quick moment for a final word from our sponsor, and we're going to come back with the final segment with Dr. Michael Hall.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Perficio. Perficio learns more about you as you make progress and then uses that information to help you even more. It is quasi-AI. Visit www.perficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can be helped by something that learns more about you, because that is the difference that makes the difference.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with Dr. Michael Hall, and we're talking about resiliency. So this is the final part, and it's been a wonderful conversation. Final question, Doc. What are the keys to being resilient?
Well, the first key is really waking up to embrace the setback, because you can't change it if you don't accept it. So what is it? And then as we do that, those 3 T's is going to protect your heart. It's that there then, which then enables us to become what we are by nature, problem solvers. Our brain is designed to find and solve problems, and now we're ready to solve those problems. And so that's the beginning of it. As we solve those problems, we're going to cope. We're going to start surviving. We're going to start normalizing. And the step after that is thriving. Too many people will only go in resilience so far. They're surviving, but that's no way to live. Just to survive. Just to, okay, I'm enduring and I keep remembering all these bad things of life. We need to move to thriving, to really mastering it, to recovering hope, to recovering joy and passion and love and living fully. And then we're fully being resilient.
So being resilient is the key to being truly human, because animals, they solve the most simplistic problems, but that's their realm, that's their domain. We, being humans, solve complex problems, and that's the description of being a human. That's the beauty, that's the gift of God's gift here. This brain, this mind, is that we can solve problems, so that we can have, things beyond survival.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And what's beyond survival is meaningfulness.
Yes.
It's living a meaningful life that is making a difference and contributing. And everybody wants that. That's a drive inside all of us. And it's possible no matter how many setbacks you've had.
It's so true, of course. And, one of the things, I know pain, right? Because anyone who's alive knows pain. Life is painful, right? And, and I've had my share of pain, debts and whatever. And some people said to me, "Oh, Tony, you've had such a bad luck with people that have died, been close to you, and this and that." And okay, I allow them to have their opinion, but I say I know that life is painful, but it also has joy.
Right.
It has joy too. So we can talk about the pain, but we can talk about the joy as well, and that's the better part of life, right? Like the pain is just like the ticket. Right, to be in the ride, to see the movie, but joy is where it's at, man.
Yeah,
and you get that by being resilient, not wallowing in this lower thinking, this thinking that doesn't solve problems, that just stays in the problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
resilience is future oriented. The setback locks you into the past. That the past determines the future. Whereas resilience is, I determine my future, because whatever's happening is just happening now, and it's not forever. This too will pass.
So true, man. I think that's a key part of personal development, is that we can have the future that we want, if we do what it takes to have it, not just dreaming it. That's the step 1. You got to go to step 2 after that, buy a book, whatever. And a book is just another step, certainly far from being the end, and now we're coming to the end. The 2 most prolific people I know are you, sir, and Rex Sikes. Do you know Rex Sikes, right? Rex is a good friend of mine. He's a mentor of mine. But no one can touch you on the book side. 58. Rex just came out with one recently, his first personal development one, but you've got like 58. It's just incredible. And we've been talking about one of your books, which is called Resiliency, Be the Phoenix. Is that correct?
Yeah, Being the Phoenix.
Being the Phoenix, right. Yeah. ING, very important there, right? We give maneuver, we give space, we give action. But I mean, I think you've written like 5 in the last year or so.
Yeah.
Boy, talk about someone who really took advantage of 2020 being a down year, right? The pandemic year. Well, that's the way to be, man. And maybe we'll have you on a subsequent podcast talking about another book. But let's just talk about how people can get your book or maybe check out another book that you offer. So how can a person contact you or see what you're about or what you offer?
Well, the website is Neurosemantics, one word, neurosemantics.com. And we've got a lot of the books, physical books people can buy. We've got a lot of the books on the shop, which are PDF files people can buy for Kindle. And the website has just lots and lots of articles. I think there's 8,000 pages of articles and patterns and things. We've made it so that it's just a library of references for people.
Audience, I totally and truly recommend that you go to his site and sign up for his blog. He truly and sincerely is my favorite blogger. He has all this great knowledge, but he makes it so accessible. He doesn't dumb it down, but he makes it easily understood. And it's so pertinent and usable stuff that's topical. I totally encourage you to go to his site just to sign up for his blog, and if nothing more. So that's neurosemantics.com. And by the way, that I alluded to it earlier. Neurosemantics is, and I mentioned it, is a primary thing that he's known for, which is this, kind of an offshoot of NLP. But it's well, check it out. Check it out. I really appreciate everything you do, Doc. You have any final remarks for our viewers and listeners?
Well, if in the last year you've been knocked down, keep whatever the knockdown is outside. If you keep it outside and keep your heart and mind clean, you will bounce back. And that's what resilience is all about. And bouncing back is just a skill to learn like any other skill, and you can do that.
Wonderful. Michael, I really appreciate you very much for giving me your time, and my audience. I really appreciate it so much. Again, you're so respected and established, and I'm a up and comer, and you really were very generous with me, and I really appreciate that, sir.
It's been my privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I encourage any listener to go to neurosemantics.com. Check out the articles, sign up for the blog, or buy a book. I just, like I mentioned at the beginning, I just bought another book from you, Executive Decision. I'm looking forward to that now. And now I consider myself an executive. I'm the head of my company now. I have, I closed my life coaching practice, and I've created a technological coaching practice. And so it's time to me to be not just an entrepreneur, but the leader of a company. So I want to think, I got to think like an executive. So I've got to do what executives do, which includes reading books about being an executive, right? Which you mentioned earlier about being resilient or educating yourself. So I really appreciate what you do. And remember, every one of us is responsible for ourselves, and we can all use some help. Thanks a lot, Dr. Michael Hall.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast, where insights, attitudes, and methods for success get illuminated. Learn what leaders and change workers have done and are doing now to create magnificent futures. Remember to visit our website at self-helpcoaching.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Self-Help Coaching Podcast.